If you did any sort of mobile gaming in the early 90s, which that was even a new term, you probably had a Game Boy. And why wouldn't you? It was a great price for a large library. It had a long battery life. There were a lot of really good things that the Game Boy had going for it. Or you might have had a Game Gear. It had a little bigger screen. It was color, but it ate through 6 batteries like it was going out of style. The Game Gear, looking back on it, was actually a pretty decent handheld with a good library. It wasn't as in-depth or had as many A-list titles as the Game Boy, but it was a solid system. If you pick up a Game Gear today, you might notice that the screen is really difficult to view. You're not going to view it like this. You might have to tilt it at an angle. And that's very indicative, like most things, most vintage electronics, of bad capacitors. We're going to show you how to replace the capacitors in your Game Gear and get you back into mobile gaming if you have a plethora of batteries laying around. So before you order a cap kit for a Game Gear, you need to find out what revision of the board you have. There's a few different versions and the capacitor values will vary. So before you do that, before you order, you need to open it up. Now again, I got my cap kit from Console 5, if you couldn't tell. They're kind of my go-to for a lot of these things. I just like working with them. I like the customer service they have. But you buy through who you want. This is not sponsored by Console 5. So getting into the Game Gear, it's 6 Phillips screws, 2 on the side and 2 on the bottom. And then you have a security bit at the top. Pretty easy to get into considering the size of this thing. Now I've had this Game Gear for probably 15 or 16 years. I got it at an estate sale. It was actually part of a package deal. When I was in college, I was doing a lot of diving. I'm still doing diving now, but I just started getting into teaching. I was a scuba instructor, and I was always on the lookout for more gear, tanks, and there was an estate sale near the university I went to that had scuba equipment. Had a bunch of tanks, especially Steel 72s, which are my preferred open water tank for a lot of reasons. But it also had some aluminum 80s, and the date group on them, it was a bad batch of alloy, and some of the tanks could fail, but you would never really know, so as a industry was kind of banned those tanks. But the point is, I didn't want to pay full price for what they had, so I said, look, throw in the Game Gear, and you got yourself a deal. And I took it home, and I promptly didn't do anything for 15 years until this video. So, pretty good deal overall. So once you get all the screws out, be very careful how you open this. What I like to do is just kind of open it like you were opening a book, but the bottom of the Game Gear is what we want to fold open, because as you can see, we have our power cable and 2 audio cables here. Any other way, you damage breaking these cables. So we're just going to carefully disconnect it. I always disconnect from the daughter board, not the main board. There, and at that point, so now we can see we have our audio board, our power board, and then our main board down here. Backlit display on the Game Gear, so that's why we kind of have this interesting contraption here that you wouldn't see on a Game Boy. Now we're going to see how easily we can see this here, but the capacitors that Sega put on here, they're just electrolytic capacitors in a plastic case laying on their side, but they're glued on. So I see a lot of people, they'll try to get their hot air station and start working it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What I like to do is just snip off the legs and then twist the glue off. It's going to look bad because there's a lot of glue under there, but that'll clean up pretty good. So let's get the boards out, and then we can start laying our capacitors out, and we'll get the rest of the tools and working on it. One thing I did behind the scenes, and I highly encourage this for any Game Gear or really any capacitor, anytime you work in electronics, get drawings. These are from Console 5. They show you where the capacitors are, what their numbers are, and then I write the values down that come in the cap kit. I did this for the soundboard, the power board, and the main board. Trust but verify though. I've had rare instances where a factory installed capacitor might not be the same value that you get in the cap kit or something expected. So I write down what comes in the kit, but I always verify it with what is installed on the board, and you might have to deviate from there. I forgot to show you earlier, but on the main board, this is the number you want to look for. So my board is VA1-837-9024. Take that number. You can look on the Console 5 website or whatever website of your preference is. That'll tell you what capacitor kit you need for this board. So on the main board, it's on the left-hand side. If you're looking at it open, it's on the right-hand side here under your number 1 and 2 buttons. So that's the number you need to find to order your capacitor kit. All right, so I'm getting ready to remove the capacitors on the audio board. Surface mount, they're not through hole, so different ways to do this. You see a lot of guys, they'll get some pliers and twist them off. You could get your soldering iron on a fine tip and heat up the edges and pry it off that way. If you have a heat gun, that's the best way to do it. So that's what we're going to do here. And we're just going to apply some heat. And then I'm going to get in with my tweezers and lift it off. All right, so that's still running in the background, but I'll try to talk over it. So you see they came off really easy, and we do have probably a little bit of corrosion on there. So we'll clean the board up before we put the new capacitors on. I did verify that all of these values match what was provided, as well as what I wrote down on our schematic. So right now we're good to go with the recapping of the audio board, but before we do that, we're going to scrub it with some IPA. All right, so that cleaned up pretty good. You do see there are some red marks right here. That's actually marker, maybe a little bit of glue or something. It's not corrosion. That's the good part. But I did clean the front and the back of the board with IPA. Also going to go through with some deoxit and get the audio knob as well as the jack, just to make sure any corrosion in there we get taken care of. I want this to be as good as possible when we reassemble it. Of course, we're going to clean off the board one more time before we put it back in, just to get all the other goop off. So we're ready to put the new capacitors on now. We'll do a very similar method, but what we'll do is we'll use the solder, we'll put some wet solder down, then we'll put the capacitor on and we'll use the heat gun to really seal it in. All right, so before we put our electrolytic surface mount capacitors on, let's just talk about them real quick. So the capacitor has a black stripe on it. That's the negative side. The board, in the circle here, we have a green and a white side. The green has a little positive next to it, and this white side is the negative. So we're going to start with C5. That's this guy right here. The stripe's there on the board, and the stripe is there on the capacitor. So it's going to sit on here just like that. Now, everybody has their own opinion on how to do stuff like this. What I like to do, and there's going to be comments, and that's fine. I like to get a little bit of flux. We're going to put it on the board, and then I'm going to wet my tip here. Redo the pad. Don't want too much on there. Okay. And then I'm going to hold the capacitor on, and I'm going to bring my heat gun over. Alright, so we got the audio board completely recapped. I did most of it off camera. It's just, let's be honest, it's just easier to do work like this and not have to worry about camera angles. So, audio board is complete. So we're going to do the power board next. These are normal through-hole capacitors. This is going to be pretty easy to take care of. The main board, on the other hand, kind of like we talked about before, they're normal electrolytic capacitors in a can, but they're in this plastic box, and that box is glued onto the board. It's pretty easy just to pick the box up. You can just get in here and pry it off. There you go, you heard it click, and now that's free. So the best thing I've done with this is get in here, clip it off, remove the whole capacitor, and then redo it. But what we're we doing on here, we're doing normal through-hole electrolytic capacitor. So we'll bend the legs at a 90-degree angle, and we will solder them onto the board like that. This is going to be pretty much just a quick montage, banging these out, repairing the power board, and repairing the main motherboard. But I am going to slow down to show you how I take care of one of these capacitors. So let's go. Alright, so I'm going to be removing capacitor 49 here to begin with. We're going to do this slow, walk you through it, and then the rest I'm just going to go and bang out. So like I said before, the plastic housing is glued on to the board. So multiple ways you can go in here. I just like to try to get some tweezers, twist them a little bit, they'll lift up. You'll hear it pop, kind of like this one over here. There we go. They'll pop up easily. It's just tack glued on there. It's not really strong. And then after that, you can either come in and cut the legs off and then solder it, or go and try to solder the legs off. We're going to try to cut it first and see if I can do this without blocking the camera too much. There we go. There's still enough on the pad that I'm not even going to remove the original leg on there. We're just going to go and get our replacement, our new capacitors. And you see I already bent these at a 90-degree angle, so it'll sit right on there just fine. Make sure you verify polarity. Space the legs out so it fits in perfectly, resting on the pads. Bring your soldering iron in. All right, now go through and I'll put some fresh solder on top of it. Just doing it now with the camera so close it'll be hard to see. But that's it. That's what you're going to do for every single capacitor on the board. So let's go super speed and get this board finished. All right, the main boards have been recapped, the audio board and the power board have been recapped. All of our sliders for volume, contrast, and power have been worked over with the oxide. I even went through with a microfiber cloth to clean the reflective area here for the light as well as the screen. So without further ado, it is time to put this back together. And to save you from another assembly montage, and just like that, we get the Game Gear back together. Got brand new batteries in here because you know we're going to need it. Got Sonic Triple Trouble, and let's give it a shot. See if I can do this where we can get no glare on the screen. Whoa. Wow. I don't know how well that comes up on camera, but that looks really, really good. A lot better than before. It's actually usable now. I don't have to hold it at a weird angle to see what's going on the screen. Yeah, no, this is great. I'm really happy with this. Do we have yep, still have volume. Well, that was, hey, after 15 years, I finally have a working Game Gear. This is going to be great. So this, when I bought this, it actually came with a bunch of stuff. I had a case, AC power adapter, some accessories, a bunch of games, NHL, PGA, golf, road rash, so you can tell whoever had this before was kind of into some of the sports games. We got wrestling here. Don't mind me as I dig through and try to find this. It also came with a screen magnifier. Unfortunately, the thumb screw on the back is missing, but that's something I can probably take care of. Well, this is probably not going to be the last time you see this Game Gear. I might do a modern screen replacement on it down the road. Who knows? Hey, stay tuned. If you like what we're doing here at Retro Tech or Die, like and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter, Mastodon, Facebook, Instagram, almost all the places where the cool kids are. You can find us here. So this is going to close out this video. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.